Well, welcome everyone. I want to welcome you to Curious Minds with Gail Now. And my name is Gail Robertson, and I am a recovering journalist. Also, dealing with this wonderful sunshine today. So I'm getting some sunlight coming streaming in. I want to welcome everybody that's joining live today. Please drop a comment where you're from. And if you want to have any questions about today, please also do that as well. So today is a topic that I have got to know about through my work in manufacturing. And I started looking into the issue of plastics and plastic bans. And for anybody that knows me and knows the work I've done, curiosity is a big part of what I do. And being curious means I like to go do research. I like to ask questions, and I want to know more about why was there a focus on banning plastic straws and plastic bags? And another thing that I do is I spend a fair amount of time researching through mainstream media, social media, and alternative media. And I came across this guest actually through LinkedIn and saw some of the things that he was posting. And here's the kicker. He backs everything up with data, a lot of data. So as I got to know more about him, I thought, oh, this looks like a very interesting person to have on my show today. Okay, so I'm going to welcome. I'm doing a bit of double duty, also doing show production today. So I want to welcome everybody that's in the studio audience. But first, let's bring on Chris, Dr. Chris DeArmitt. Now, did I pronounce your name properly? Let's get that.
Thanks, Gail.
Okay,
DeArmitt. Yes, that's perfect. Thanks. Hello,
perfect.
everyone.
Okay, now I'm going to just move you there over here. Okay, we both are in sunny places. Now you're in Ohio, correct?
That's right. Yeah, near Cincinnati.
Okay, so we're not really that far. I'm in Windsor, Ontario, Canada, just across the border from Detroit, Michigan.
Okay.
Okay, I want to welcome. So we're going to first, Chris, I want to welcome you to Curious Minds with Gail Now. For those also joining, some of the people I see coming in may know my previous show, which was Show Up with Gail Now Live. And I talked about people that were showing up on social media, which you do as well. And the reason I switched gears was I really wanted to delve into also the power of curiosity, because that's sort of the engine that's behind everything I do when I'm working with clients. And my background is in as a journalist. I now call myself a recovering journalist, and I now have my own business, and I help manufacturers as well as others both tell and share their story. So let's welcome. We have Dave Chrysler is in the house now. Dave, you two need to meet as well, because Dave is known as the king of process. He talks a lot about the value of process, working a lot of times with manufacturers. We have Elizabeth Hernandez. She's here. She also is part of a YQG Green group, and that's going to be interesting. And I'm sure the whole issue of plastic bans will be a part of that as well, because there's quite a few businesses involved in that group. And we have Chris. Now, this might be someone you know, checking in from Ann Arbor. Do you know Chris? Don't know. Okay, well, welcome, Chris. Whitney is a regular here at my show. So thank you. Whitney works in manufacturing and marketing. Oh, Melissa Lyons. Hello, Melissa. I haven't seen Melissa for a while, so that's great. Thank you for stopping by, Melissa. I think as a curious person, you will enjoy this show as well. We also have Sai. Hello, Sai. Welcome. And Toby Stretch, good morning. Okay, well, thanks everybody for stopping by. Please also know that you can join us here on LinkedIn. We are live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Yes, on YouTube. Okay, let's jump into first. I want to introduce you. I would call you a bit of a data geek too, Chris, and I mean that with the greatest of respect, because as someone, I also want to say this, as a journalist, I think journalists often, stats and analytics and data isn't often something that we're required to do in journalism. And I've kind of always regretted that. So instead, what I've done is I've learned to go to people who do know, because if I don't understand, I need to go to experts. So let's start with first the idea of curiosity, and a little just to set the scene before we get into the whole idea of plastics. I want to talk about curiosity and media and where we get our information, because this is a key part of what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah. Well, my first book was called Innovation Abyss, and that was all about creativity and curiosity. And what we find is these days we have information overload. So we need to have a way of accessing this information and filtering it down. It's just too much of it. And so unfortunately, what happens is we see headlines, things, come across our vision, and it goes into our brain, and we don't have time to read anything. No human being could possibly assimilate a billionth of the information we have these days. So you have to be curious, and you have to go and dig in a little bit deeper, like you do, into things you're interested in, instead of just relying on headlines, which at the end of the day, they'll write anything as a headline that'll get your click and get your advertising dollar, as you know, from marketing point of view.
Yes. And, we've all seen the clickbait. And I think even if it's not clickbait, I spend a lot of time on social media, especially Twitter. And I've caught myself a couple of times going to share something or send something. Luckily, I have someone I send some things to before I comment, because, sometimes something seems like, I want to check into this. And what's missing a lot of times too is that idea of going back to the original full interview. And I'm sure you've seen that, where things have been taken out of context as well.
Yes, absolutely. It's the same with the scientific studies. People talk about studies. There was one yesterday saying that glass is better than plastic for the taste of milk. And that's not what the study says at all when you read it. But nobody does check any of these things. They take one headline that suits or one line, or make up something that suits their purpose, and assume no one's going to go and actually read the thing. And that's where they're wrong. I do go and read it, and I call them on it.
You do indeed. And I'm just going to say right now, you have like a dotted line. I'm going to ask you to move over. Did you see that?
Yeah, I know. Which way should I go here?
We love the sun, right? And it's, okay, there we go. I'm trying to avoid having like a dotted line. I'm having stripes across me too.
Blinds, yeah.
This is, one of the things that I love about live is that, it is what it is, and you just got to work with. And even though before, when we were setting up, we didn't have some of these things and the sun changes. So anyways, we'll just live with it. Okay. So the idea of this show was also about plastics being banned. Plastics are seen as, and, a lot of times people just think plastics are bad, that they're, they're doing horrible things to our environment. And I might've been someone who thought that in my past. But as I've been doing research, it's really challenging my assumptions. So let's talk about the assumptions about plastics. And maybe we can start with the idea of banning straws and plastic bags, which is happening in Canada.
Yeah. Well, I'm a scientist and a problem solver, right? So some of the biggest companies in the world come to me to solve problems, technical problems. And that means that I have a lot of experience of how do you solve a problem, right? And the only way to solve it is to really understand it and have the facts. If you start off with the wrong information, you'll never solve the problem. And so the first thing I do when I hear something is go and find the data, right? So let's say you went to Google and you typed in LCA, which stands for life cycle analysis. That's a way of telling what's green and what isn't green. Let's say you typed in LCA BAG into Google right now. You would find hits from Clemson University and all around the world, right? There are 28 studies around the world to see what bag is greenest. And the answer is every study ever done, and these are peer-reviewed studies done according to official standards, every study ever done in the world says that the plastic bag is greenest, and replacing it would massively increase harm. And it would involve cutting down about 5 million more trees a year as well if you wanted to replace plastic bags. The ironic part is the Swedish guy who patented the plastic bag did it to save trees. That was his goal. And now everyone seems to have forgotten that. So one thing I want to make clear is I'm not for plastics or against anything. All I'm for is people to make rational decisions based on stuff that's actually true. And what I see now is people who are full of passion, but who haven't spent even 5 minutes to ever look at the data. They've just believed the headlines from groups who are basically green fleecing you. They're telling you whatever it takes to make you angry so that you donate and you empty your pockets for them. And no one's checking any of the stuff that they're saying. And the same for straws. You mentioned straws.
Yeah.
The same thing there. There are 2 life cycle analyses on straws, and plastic straws are the greenest. But the best thing to do is just take no straw.
Mm-hmm.
The very best is just say no to a straw. I don't understand why anyone's even arguing about it. But moving to a paper one is scientifically proven, or glass or metal is much worse.
The straw situation, that's what really got my attention, is that it seemed to be based on emotion, and it's tangible, right? We can everybody has touched a straw, used a straw, just what everybody, right? And as I looked into it, and the paper straws, which seem to go to mush after that's one issue. But the second thing is, this happens when I'm out. They will bring a straw. I don't need a straw, but what happens is, oh, you use it, and sometimes I'll say, well, it's too late now. They're going to throw it out because after I give it back.
Yeah, a couple of things. You can reuse a plastic straw 50 or 100 times. People criticize single use, but nobody's making us throw this stuff away after one use. Many of these things can be reused, and we're just failing to do it. And so, and the other thing to say about
using this one.
and the other thing to say about straws is that a lot of people have seen 200 million people have viewed this thing with a turtle with an alleged plastic straw up its nose. And if you listen to the video, which I have, they say, what is it made of? Is it a worm? Is it a worm? And then the woman says, no, he bit on it and he says it's plastic. Right? That is not a scientific test, right? You can't bite on something and decide what it's made of. You take it to a lab and you do infrared spectroscopy, for example, to work out what is the material. So they had zero evidence anywhere that it was plastic. And then we wrote to them and said, how do you know it was a straw? And they wrote back and said, oh, we don't. It could have been anything. So 200 million people think there was a turtle with a plastic straw up its nose, when in fact there is zero evidence that it was plastic and zero evidence it was a straw. And this is how easily we can take social media and distort public opinion into focusing on straws, which, let's face it, is not going to make a dent in anything.
Yes. And, this is an area I do work in and have studied is, social media, alternative media, and mainstream media. And the biggest issue isn't, I said, none of them are really bad or good. It's just, you have to make sure you're doing proper research, looking beyond only the headlines. And this is what's missing. Because I sometimes assume, well, people, of course, are double checking things. They're not just believing everything they read. Oh, yes, they are.
Yeah. That's the other thing. I mean, I put these life cycle studies up on my website. And I want to say, right, I've spent thousands of hours reading thousands of peer-reviewed scientific articles, and I did it all for free, right? This is all unpaid. I'm not like a lobbyist or anything. This is not even my job. This takes away from my actual paid job where I make money for my family, right? So this is just, I'm doing it because, and I even say, I don't care if people hate plastics, if they hate them based on something that's actually true. And that's the problem now. People hate plastics because they don't degrade, but that's not true. They hate them because there was a straw up a turtle's nose, but that's not true either. They hate them because they increase waste. Wrong again, right? So whenever you check the science, you find out that the reasons that people are against plastic are just not true. And what's even more ironic is the people who care the most are doing the most harm because they're replacing them with things proven to be worse, much worse.
Wow, that is yeah. So let's go back and give a little bit of context of exactly, what is your job? And because a lot of times, information that I've researched does come from people in the plastics world or in manufacturing. There is, there's an agenda, which is fine. People can have an agenda, and as long as they disclose it, What was fascinating when I discovered your work is that, yes, this is a passion project. I know you're a parent. So can maybe you give some context so people listening will go, oh, okay, they understand who you are.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, writing a book is a lot of work. And the only way I can ever find the energy to write a book, I've done it twice, is when I was extremely angry about something. So the first one was the innovation abyss I mentioned. And that's because people were going around, academics are going around telling people how to innovate. And these are people who've never innovated, right? So they're misleading everyone. It turns out that it's known, it's scientifically proven how you can get 10 times better innovation and spend less money, but nobody's aware of it, right? So that's why I wrote that book, and to tell people how it really works. And the same thing with this book. I put it out there. I started off because my two daughters came home from school and they'd been told something that was just an utter lie by their teachers. And I pay a lot of property tax to be in a nice school district, and to find that my kids are being taught things which are just huge whoppers is really disappointing. And so I was on 60 Minutes with Scott Pelley talking about degradation of plastics in the body. Plastics degrade rapidly unless they're properly stabilized. And so they taught my kids that plastics don't degrade, and that's just a lie. And here's the book that it comes from. It's a book from, I trace this down, this is Marine Pollution by Martha Gorman. She just wrote on page 8, plastics take 400 or 500 years to degrade. No scientific reference, she just made it up, and everyone's repeated it for decades since. And that's just a lie. The world market for plastic stabilizers to stop them degrading is $5 billion a year, and nobody would be spending $5 billion a year on something if plastics didn't degrade. So anyway, so I started off with degradation, and then people said, well, what about the litter, right? And I'm like, I don't know, I'm not a litter scientist. So I had to go and read 100 articles on litter. And then they'd say, what about the waste? What about the ocean plastics? What about the harm to turtles and whales and birds? And so I've read about 3,000 articles now on topics I have no interest in, right? I don't care about litter per se. That's not a passion for me, right? But to solve a problem, you have to see the whole problem. And as far as I can work out, no one else has read about all of these topics to see the whole problem, what the problems are and what the solutions are.
Wow, you have just summed up the work that I am advocating for, is that you need to stand back and look at the whole problem,
Right.
not only the emotional issue, right? Which is what you just touched. So let's talk about, since you touched on that, the stabilizing of plastic. And yes, you were on 60 Minutes, and I looked into that a little bit, that was fascinating, because you actually went to court, I believe, to help a lot of women because they had a mesh plastic inserted in their body. Now, if you were a plastics advocate, I can't see you going and defending these women about, because you would have said, yeah, plastics is good. Let's.
Right.
So, can you talk about that case? Because again, this just to give context to people that, the work you've done has also had definitely a social impact.
Yeah, you're right. If I were a pro plastics person, I wouldn't have been saying that plastics degrade rapidly and never should have been used for that application. So this is a mesh that they use for hernia repair and repair on ladies as well. In the nether regions, let's say. And it's something that degrades. I mean, thin pieces of polypropylene degrade really rapidly. In fact, unstabilized polypropylene film, it's one of the most common plastics. It's what the original Tupperware is made of. A thin film of that will degrade in less than 1 year in a sealed drawer, right? If you were to have it in a dark drawer, it would crumble and lose all of its strength in 1 year. That's actually been measured. Whereas a piece of paper under the same conditions is estimated to take 2,700 years to degrade. Right? So if we are against materials, and so this is the ironic part, right? Plastics degrade faster than almost all materials we use. They degrade faster than metal and glass and ceramics and clay and, pretty much everything apart from wood. So it degrades at about the same speed as a piece of paper if you average out all the conditions you could have in the dark, wet, light, etc. If you take all of those conditions, plastics degrade about as fast as paper and faster than almost everything. So it's ironic that they're being, go to Lowe's, right, and ask for, hey, I want a gutter that's guaranteed to last 500 years. They'll laugh in your face, right? I mean, it'll be the best joke they've heard all year. We all know in our everyday lives that plastics don't last forever. That's why we, have to buy new stuff sometimes when it gets worn out. So that's...
To me, I got to stop. And this is something, Dave, I agree with Dave just said, this is fascinating. Dave, as you know, a lot about me, when I find people that have fascinating story and it's backed by, research, or at least another story that's not getting covered by media. And one of the things, as you know, I'm in Canada, and we've just had now, like, as I said, the straws and the bags were banned. And I was trying to find research on that. And I assume no one came to you from to ask you about this, or I couldn't find any reference to your work. So where do you find, like, in terms of, I often want to know, like, why do you think the government was so focused on straws and bags?
Yeah, it's a strange thing, isn't it? I mean, we know why politicians are motivated. They do what it takes to get votes. That's pretty much how it works, as far as I understand. I have no politics. I have no political party. I should mention that as well. So I think they're doing it to get votes. And this is the problem, right? So as far as I can work out, a lot of NGOs, like I mentioned earlier, Greenpeace, when we were talking before the show. So this is a book by Dr. Patrick Moore, right? He was the founder of Greenpeace and the president of it. And he left in disgust. And he says, in the book, they just make stuff up to get your donations. That's their business concept. He's published that in 2 books and 1 report, which you can download. It's called, what is that one called? It's about the business model. Just type in business model of Greenpeace and you'll find that's what he says about them. And it's the same with these other NGOs, as far as I can work out. They've made stuff up. They've misinformed the customer and the public into buying packaging and stuff which is less green, and the politicians are pandering it to it as well, because they want the votes. And this is the problem. If you start with misinformation, people end up making crazy decisions that increase harm, and that's exactly what's going on now. And that's what's part of this passion that I have, is that people should be making decisions based on stuff that's true. And as I said earlier, ironically, some of the most passionate people who care the most are creating most harm, because like a cotton bag is 200 times worse than a polyethylene bag. And they're prancing around with their cotton bags. Some of them are genuine and other ones are virtue signaling. They're basically, this cotton bag is like a badge of honor, like, look how green and caring I am. And the irony of it is that this person's actually increasing harm. So we have multiple problems going on here, but it can't be solved unless people know the facts.
Yes. And we're going to probably get into this. I said I do want to have you back, probably a future show, talking about innovation and curiosity to a greater degree, because unless we start asking more questions, we are going to keep remaining in the problem.
And you said, why aren't the politicians doing anything? You literally type in LCA space BAG return. That's 8 keystrokes, right? There are 28 studies. They're available on, you can find them through Google. They're not hidden anywhere. They're free online. I found them all. And I mean, how much work would that be for the World Wildlife Fund or Greenpeace or the Ellen MacArthur Foundation to type LCA space BAG return and read the studies? The science is all done, and it's been done for decades. And the science on the other topics is done as well. The science on litter is done. The science on microplastics, ocean plastics, all of it's done, measured, published, and nobody's checking any of it.
Now, what about, though, the image of, let's talk about turtles and the plastic bag around the turtle's neck? Because I was one of those people that saw that photo,
yeah,
and thought, oh my God, look what's happening. These bags are killing our turtles.
Right. That was on the BBC last week. So they had a turtle with a photoshopped bag around its neck. I mean, think of the probabilities, right? The number of bags in the ocean has been measured. It's very, very low. And the probability that a turtle sticking its head through a bag and that a photographer was there at the exact same time is is zero, right? So I went to Shutterstock and I found the original photo, which had no bag, right? So there was you can buy the photo with the bag, which they photoshopped on, or you can buy the original one with no bag. And any photo you've ever seen of a turtle in a bag is photoshopped, because they don't exist. And it's not the only example. There's another one on my website. If you go to the phantomplastics.com, you'll see all about that turtle story and about plastics in the environment for free. And you'll see other examples of these Photoshop turtle bag things, because it's an easy way to get people to open their wallets and make donations, is to make up stuff about turtles. If you check the science on turtles, you can literally go to Google and type in turtle mortality study, right? 3 words, and you will find peer-reviewed articles on what's killing turtles. And it's not plastic or bags. You can do the same with whales, whale mortality study, and you'll find out not a single mention of the word plastic or bag in any whale mortality study. The same thing with birds. Bird mortality study, no mention of plastic or bag in any study. You know what's killing birds? About 1 billion birds are killed every year in America by cats. So anyone who actually cared about birds will put a bell on their cat or don't buy a cat, right? So this is an example of what I mean, right? People are talking about these wind turbines killing birds. That's about 36,000 a year, right? So it's nothing compared to buildings, nothing compared to cats and all the other things. Why wouldn't, if somebody genuinely cared about birds and they weren't just trying to get your money out of your pocket by blaming plastics, they would be looking at the bird mortality stats and trying to work out what we can do to kill less birds. But they're not doing that. They're doing whatever it takes to demonize plastics and make us donate.
Okay, this is so much valuable.
And this is all in my slides, like literally when I say bird mortality, I have a picture, I cite the science, there's links on the website so you can download the studies yourself. And this has been out for 3 years now, my information, and no one's found a single mistake anywhere. And it's been crawled over by, thousands and thousands of people.
So you're not getting are there any mainstream media, any newspapers, other than you were on the 60 Minutes, but any mainstream media coverage of your work?
I was on iHeartRadio twice last week and also before that. So there's some radio coverage. I've been on a lot of podcasts. I've been presenting at some conferences and events around. I've been invited to present in Portugal and even some place I never heard of. I was asked to present in Vilnius. I had to go and look up what country that was in. And Brazil, I was asked to present in Sao Paulo yesterday. But I'm not going to all of these events because I have an actual job that takes my time and I can't be just jetting around talking about this all the time. Not a lot of mainstream media coverage. There is a guy called Dwayne Polman who's supposed to be some super duper journalist who's super ethical. And he's promised to cover it, but so far he hasn't gotten around to it. So I'm really hoping that he does, because I I did a LinkedIn post and I begged journalists. I basically said, is there one professional journalist who's ethical who will at least glance at evidence in the whole of America? And I got not one phone call. You can go and check that LinkedIn
Yeah,
post.
no,
I
I
had
follow.
9,000 views and not one taker of a journalist who would even consider looking at the truth.
Well, as you know, I'm a former journalist, and one of the things that when I was going to school, it was so important was to, be as objective as possible, even though true objectivity is not possible, but be objective, and ask a lot of questions and really look around corners all the time. Like it was always about, and also going to people that maybe, that had the data. That was always something I tried to focus on, was like, okay, show me proof, because we do a lot by emotion, right? A lot of things happen and we make those decisions. In fundraising, that's a big part of it is.
There's a book behind me. Jonathan Haidt did a lot of work, and he proved that we're not rational beings. We have a gut reaction. We see plastic and it looks foreign, right? So we decide we don't like it. The same thing that drives racism, right? We see anything that doesn't look like us, and we think is evil and nasty. And then we make up logical reasons why we had that gut reaction. That's how the human brain actually works, and they've proven that. And that's what's going on with plastics. We see something and then we make up reasons why we don't like it, even though those reasons don't stand up to scrutiny. And that's an issue because it's increasing harm.
It is. So let's go to, we have a few more comments, but I want to pull up a couple of stats to show some images, because this might help. I always think people sometimes are visual learners. I know for myself, seeing, because I will tell you, I thought plastics are just like loaded in our ocean, and that plastics are the biggest problem that we have, and that everything, because we look around and, I'll pull up a couple of things here that I showed plastic. I've got, here's plastic. There's a deodorant made out of plastic. I just bought toothbrushes. Headphone set, right? So these are all imagine I often say when I'm talking in the world, because I work in mold making too, I'm like, picture a world without plastics. So when people say plastics are bad, I'm like, and we'll get to that too, but let's,
that's what the name of the book comes from, the plastic paradox. We're told we can't live with them, we can't live without them. Which one is it? Let's work it out.
Okay, let's just read a couple of comments here before we go into the whole problem, not what's convenient to support your position or solution. Yes, so the whole problem. Okay, got to look at the whole problem, you say, yeah. Then we have a LinkedIn user, not sure who this is, agreed politicians and NGO are entirely self-motivated, which, and we'll get to that too, because I think that's not unusual, but now that's why you need curiosity. Because I always say, of course, people have a position, of course. And when I was a reporter, people would say, oh, you can't believe everything you journalists are writing. And I'm like, no, that's true. And they were shocked that I agreed with them. I'm like, no, you shouldn't. I said, if I'm covering something, it's this perspective. And then you can get into too what stories are covered and what aren't.
Well, let me share something else. I tried to reach the mainstream media because people tell me, oh, people are trying to get me in front of Congress now. There's a British Plastics Federation is planning to get me in front of Parliament in the UK. The Canadians are trying to get me in front of the politicians so I can show them the facts, because no one else seems to have the facts. And I even spent hundreds of dollars of my own money to get a list of reporters. So I wrote to reporters at the New York Times, at the Washington Post, at Bloomberg, and Reuters, and all of these places, and not one single response. I wrote to 30 reporters. I spent hundreds of dollars of my own money to get verified email addresses to the environmental correspondents and all of these topics, and not one of them would spend 3 minutes to even glance at the science. That's how corrupt they are, or lazy.
And then there's a whole issue beyond of how stories are decided upon, right? So that's another issue too. Then we have another user said the greenwashing is atrocious, plus consider the turtle picture would only even qualify as a sample of one. That's another, from a scientific perspective, right? One sample. Yeah.
Yeah, people say to me, oh, there was I once saw a picture of a whale with whatever. And I'm like, yeah, but this is a study with like 20,000 whales, right? And real scientists don't take a holiday snap of one example of something. I mean, you could say a coconut fell on a turtle's head and killed it. We should ban coconut trees. I mean, it doesn't make sense to take a one-off incident and come to conclusions based on that.
Now we have another question here. I'm not sure, maybe you know what this is, from Simon. Why does no one question what the Plastic Planet put on LinkedIn?
I know there is an organization called the Plastic Planet run by Sean Sutherland, and they continually post stuff which just isn't true when you check the science. And when they get called on it, they don't care. And as far as I can work out, I'm just guessing here, but as far as I can work out, their whole business is selling a stamp that says plastic free. Right, so they're not for the environment; they're against plastic. That's their business concept: is to sell stamps certifying things as plastic free. And the irony of it is, when COVID hit, they started selling a plastic free face shield. You can see she got interviews with Wired, I think was one of them, and or Business Week, or some quite large publications. She got a huge amount of publicity out of this plastic free face shield, which was of course made of plastic. It was made of cellulose acetate, and they claim to be against plasticizers, and cellulose acetate is usually packed full of stabilizers. So they got a lot of I assume they made money selling this face shield. They got a lot of publicity based on a plastic face shield when they claimed to be against plastic, and I called them on that too. Of course, they had no answer. So there's a lot of people who are greenwashing, but in a way, what I think is even like these paper bottles with with a plastic bottle hidden inside, which is terrible for the environment. So that's one example. But I think what's even worse is the green fleecing, where so-called environmental groups are taking our money and telling us lies.
Whew. Okay, Chris, let's go to, I'm going to share, let's look at now. And there's so much there. I hope people go back and listen to that. And I'm going to go check out the Plastic Planet because, this is part of, as you know, also I was listening to some videos from the Ocean Conservancy. We're going to talk about that as well. So let's go to, let me just share. This is
apparently a Plastic Planet is in the same building as the BBC. Somebody pointed out to me, so they suspect something dodgy is going on there. That it's not genuinely an independent organization, but I don't know about that.
Okay, so here I might make this larger because it's now small. Let me see if I can make this. No, let me just see here. How do I get? There we go. Okay, so let's look at this because this to me was an aha moment because I'm a visual learner, so I like to see, and I would have thought plastics were like the opposite. I like ceramics mainly 84%.
Right.
What?
So this is our materials use on plastic, according to this book. I found this by chance. I was reading through the book, and I was shocked as you are, Gail. So I found out plastics are about 1% by weight of the materials we use. So there's a perception that we're drowning in plastics. Well, what is the word you would use for what's happening with the ceramics and the concrete and the wood and the steel? This is another example that plastics are not being treated fairly, right? If someone was really concerned about the amount of material we use, and I think we should be concerned, we're using too much material, there's no logical way that we will be focused on 1% of it. We will be focused on the other 99%, but I never see any posts about ceramics or wood or steel or using less of it. So this is just this is proof that we're demonizing plastic and not really behaving rationally. Nobody's actually apparently worried about the amount of material we use, because if they were, they would be focused elsewhere. And I want to point out this is from an old book, so I checked the most recent figures, and it's actually lower than that. It's 0.4%, which is quoted on the website and in the videos and so forth. It's 0.4% of materials by weight and less than 1% by volume. So again, it's not the problem that we're made to believe it is. And I think one reason that this misconception came around is that plastic use started from zero. Right, we're familiar with wood and metal and concrete. We've had them for hundreds or thousands of years. And when plastic started from zero and it increased, it was of course an exponential increase. It increased 84 times over a period of decades from zero. Right, so that's I think where people got this idea. Oh my God, plastics is taking over, because the growth rate was so high for a while, and now it's stabilized. People will tell you that plastic sales are going nuts and we're going to have double as much by 2050 or whatever. It turns out that the growth rate of plastics is 2 or 3% a year, exactly the same as wood, exactly the same as glass, exactly the same as metal, exactly the same as paper. So this criticism that plastics are growing out of control is not valid either. It doesn't hold up to scrutiny.
So, and if we look at the ceramics, like, I had to get some new concrete put in my back. So they had to take out all the old concrete. Off it goes. I don't know what happens to it, but I guess it doesn't decompose very
No, it's landfilled, and it's actually a huge contributor to landfill. I've got a book behind me that talks about that. It's a huge contributor, and most people don't talk about it because it's not counted as household waste. So it goes into the landfill, but they don't tell you about it because it's in a different category.
Okay, let's stop for a minute and let's talk about let's talk about where waste comes from, because straws and plastic bags,
Yeah.
mostly that's individual. That's you and I were regular people. And like I said, those are two things, interesting, that everybody has touched, right? It's not a unique
Right.
material, right? So what's the percentage of yeah, on commercial or residential?
Yeah. In the book, I talked about, so the EPA statistics were that 13% of what goes into a landfill is plastic, right? And I thought, well, it's a reasonable amount. It's about half as much as paper. Paper is about 25%. So again, if we were genuinely concerned about what's going into a landfill, we would be twice as concerned about paper as we are about plastic. But no one is. Nobody cares about it. And then when we compare household waste, it turns out that's only 3% of overall waste. Industrial waste is 97% of all waste. So it turns out plastic waste is about the same as it is with the materials use. It's about 0.5% of all waste is plastic, and still under 1% by volume. So again, focusing on plastic in terms of waste doesn't make logical sense. And just to hammer home that point I was just making about paper, right? So here's something I put on LinkedIn. You probably saw it this week or last week. And here's the thing: ban. Why should we ban it? Makes up 25% of household waste, massive contributor to landfills, much of it's single use, creates huge amounts of CO2, it's less green than the alternatives, contains toxic chemicals, degrades to microparticles, and take thousands of years to decompose. And that material I just described is paper, right? Do you want to ban it now? And that's the problem, right? As soon as you hear it's paper, like, oh no, friendly, good old paper. But it's not true. It's full of chemicals. It's twice as much waste, and it doesn't decompose rapidly at all under some conditions. And all of the same things that plastics are criticized for, paper's worse. If I look at single use, a lot of paper is zero use. And I'm talking about this spam that I get through my letterbox. Every day I get this rubbish that goes directly in the trash can, zero use, and nobody cares because they're not genuinely interested in the environment or plastics. They're more interested in demonizing something illogically.
And that's interesting because how the other area that I'm interested in is looking at uh, banning versus looking at disposal and waste and overuse of, like we've talked about, just say no to a straw. If they
Right.
stop giving out straws, that would be a help. And if you ask for a bag, because now I have to go buy plastic bags to use for my garbage, or I no longer have a cat, which was, now I find out, bird killer. She didn't go inside though. So, but I have to go buy now, and I know you told us, like a thicker bag that
Yeah.
actually is worse than the little ones I would have just used. And I used all my bags. I used them, always reuse them for
Yeah,
garbage.
that's the irony. People say, "Oh, you're a plastic guy. Of course, you're against bans," but that's not the case, right? When you ban bags, they've done studies on it. People have to go out and buy a much thicker trash can liner because they were reusing the plastic bags before, the much thinner ones. So you end up with dramatic increase in plastic sales. So bag bans. It's incredible. Why would you take something which is 28 studies, peer reviewed, is unequivocal that replacing them increases harm, and now you're selling more plastic as well? It's just crazy, and chopping down 5 million more trees a year. Um, it's just unbelievable, and no one's checking this stuff. All this information is readily available, and nobody's checking it. I mean, these politicians should be ashamed of themselves that they haven't got some intern who can type in LCA space BAG into. I mean, I know the youth of today might not be all that we hope for, but hopefully they can type 7 letters into a typewriter and click return.
Well, let's talk about LCA summary. Let's go there now. And okay, so this, you say, if you want to massively increase harm to the environment, then say no to plastics. That
Yeah.
got my attention. That was a good, because I was like, what? Because you have to read it like, what did you say?
Yeah.
So I
Well,
don't know if I'm going to go to, while we're talking, I'm going to see if I can make this. Let's see if I can make, there we go.
that's
That's a
good.
bit
Yeah.
larger. Okay. Picture in picture layout. Okay. Let me
So
see.
a lot of people, I just saw a survey last week that only 50% of people know what an LCA is. So it's a scientific way of telling what's green and what's less green, right? So you take these materials, you count up how much energy was used to make them, and water, all about acid rain and waste disposal and recycling. All of these things are put into an equation basically, and it's all computerized. So people have to use standardized numbers and they can't cheat. And it has to be checked by independent experts. And it's been around for decades, so it's pretty good, and it's accepted by governments, by NGOs, by by companies. It's the only way to know what's green. Without LCA, we'd be flipping a coin. So I looked at about 50 life cycle analyses here. Because I'm a real scientist, right? The public tend to have an opinion and go and find one piece of information that supports their pre-existing opinion. If you want to be a professional scientist, you have to go and find all the information and then make up your mind based on what you found. So that's why I looked for 28 studies on bags and didn't give up after I found the first one. So there are 28, and polyethylene and polypropylene come out as the greenest options every time, much greener than paper, cotton, or bioplastic. Packaging, same thing. Plastic wins every time. Paper, metal, and glass are much, much worse. Straws, the same thing. Pipes, the same thing. I found 13 on pipes. PE, PP, PVC, greener than copper or iron. And banknotes, the same thing, and so forth. And surprisingly, PET, polyester, is greener than cotton as well, according to the only 2 studies I could find. So what we're doing is it would be, let's say you had 4 children, Gail, and you decided to only punish the one who behaves the best. That's what we're doing now, right? Imagine you had 4 kids and you only punished the one with bans or fines, locked them in their room, and nobody's perfect, right? My kids aren't perfect. I'm not perfect. Nobody is. But we should be picking a solution which is proven scientifically to cause the least harm of the options we have. It's like Winston Churchill once said, democracy is the worst form of government apart from all the other ones we've tried, right? And you could say that about plastic. Yeah, plastic's the worst material apart from all the other ones. The only thing that's greener than plastic in a life cycle analysis, sometimes wood beats it. If you can make something out of a block of wood, that will usually beat plastic.
And that's interesting because in the world of, let me just stop here. So in the world of manufacturing, I often say, look in your vehicle, all the plastic in your vehicle. How would you make everything in the vehicle without plastic?
Yeah. Well, they've done studies on that too. So if you calculate the amount of oil used to make plastic, people think it's some huge amount, but it isn't. It's 5% of oil. And meanwhile, we burn the other 85% without even blinking, right, as fuel and so forth. So nobody has a problem with that. But the 5%, they're all up in arms about. And then you calculate how much oil do we save using plastic to make our cars and our airplanes and trains and our boats and everything lighter. And it works out to be more than that 5%. So the net effect of plastic is to reduce oil consumption and to reduce CO2. And nobody talks about that. These green groups and even UNEP and big organizations only tell you how much CO2 is produced in fossil fuel used to make the plastic, and they always forget to tell you how much is saved by using the plastic, right? Which is cheating. That's like only showing one side of the equation. It's unprofessional and misleading.
Chris, I have to say, as you're talking, as a former journalist and now doing this show, I often try to go and I was trying to find at least other questions I could ask you, not to trip you up, but just to say, okay, there's another view here. And so we've talked about some of those things, like I said, the turtle, like I said, a lot of the marine life. And then the next thing that we see, I went to the Ocean Conservancy, I listened to a webinar, and one of the things I noticed, they had a journalist on, I think from Wired, but I had trouble finding actual stats and data other than they showed an image of plastic. So they started with an image of showing all the different plastic granules. So I was like, oh yeah, plastic granules. Those must be bad, right? And then they showed the picture though of how those granules go through the food chain in the ocean. So they showed that. And then they said, this is landing on our plate. And then they went on to talk about how bad it was. But I was like, well, what else is in the fish, and is it just plastic? So it got me thinking, okay, I want to know more about, is that worse than other things that are in our fish, and why plastic granules?
That's a great point. Yeah. No one else is comparing to anything else, right? It's like the Winston Churchill thing we just talked about. Yeah. Thomas Sowell is a very famous economist, and he said, if you hear something that sounds like a good idea, ask yourself, compared to what, how much will it cost, and where's your evidence? And that's what people aren't doing. They're not zooming out and stopping to just demonize plastic and say, okay, compared to what would happen if we did replace it? And so when we look at this microplastics topic, I've read hundreds and hundreds of articles on it. It's been well researched for decades. And there's an interesting thing about microplastics, right? We don't talk about micro metal or micro wood or micro glass, right? If you do internet searches for those things, nothing comes up because these environmental groups made up the word microplastics, right? We have a word for small particles of solid, right? We call it dust, right? That's the word that we use for everything else apart from these microplastics. And they did that to make it sound scary and foreign. And when we look at how much do we eat, the World Wildlife Fund claim that we eat up to a credit card of plastic a week. And you think, oh my, that's 5 grams, right? But there was a more recent study, not funded by the World Wildlife Fund, that says that that's completely ridiculous and that the other study is unbelievably bad, and that the actual amount of time it would take us to eat 5 grams of plastic is 20,000 years, right? So it turns out of all this dust that's around us, dust is everywhere. So that's what makes me laugh, right? They're like, they found microplastics on Mount Everest. You're like, they found dust on Mount Everest? No kidding. That's a headline? You're kidding me. We found microplastics in the whatever. You're like, yeah, dust is everywhere. Get used to it. I mean, imagine I wrote to a journalist and said, I found dust on my keyboard. Please put it on the front page. You know, they wouldn't do it because it's not news. But somehow microplastics is like, oh my goodness, they found it here, there, or everywhere. So it's 0.03% of dust is microplastics. And it's polyethylene, polypropylene, and PET, which is tested and proven to be so safe we can eat our food from it, right? They've tested this microplastic. It's known to be safe. And then the question you ask, Gail, is what else is around? The other 25% of that dust is quartz, which is proven to cause cancer in humans. And nobody cares. Nobody blinks. Nobody asks the question. It's full of heavy metals. It's full of dead skin cells. It's full of bacteria and spores and all kinds of things which we know are carcinogenic or poisonous or dangerous, and nobody cares. But they'd rather focus on 0.03% of polyethylene that's harmless. That shows you how irrational people are.
What was that thing that was found? You said
Quartz, yeah. It's
quartz, like quartz.
Oh. Quartz, yeah. It's proven to cause cancer in humans, 25% of dust.
Wow. And I was also looking into the dust in the Grand Canyon and how much dust people are breathing in that was also it, because often people say, oh, there's this many tons of dust and coming from plastic. So more stats coming at us here.
Yeah, I have that one. I'm just looking at my own webpage here because I'm a scientist and I like to quote.
Yeah,
So I have that on my FAQ, frequently asked questions. All of these nonsense things that people make up, all these myths are dispelled on my website, and I send links to the evidence. So yeah, the Grand Canyon one I know is covered here.
Right. And we can come back to that because I actually want to get into what's in the ocean, and we could also come back and reference that because it had to do with I know I wrote down where did I put it?
Yeah, they said there's 10 tons of plastic dust being deposited in the Grand Canyon, but there's 50,000 tons of dust being deposited every year in the Grand Canyon. So they never give you any perspective or scale. And that's very important as a scientist to point out, all right, you measured something, but what does it really mean compared to what? Is it really a lot? And that's where a lot of this microplastics research has gone wrong. There was a scientific study that proved that the media has lied to us about microplastics. The media say 93% of the time that microplastics are a definite threat to health, and only 20% of actual scientific articles say that. So the media start with 20% of articles only, right? So 80% saying no problem. And then they report 93% of the time to the public that it's a definite danger to health, which isn't at all what the scientists are saying.
Wow. There is, and I'm going to encourage everybody. We'll drop, and your website is, I should have put that up. I'm going to put that up. It's, what is that?
Yeah, phantomplastics.com, PHANTOM. So again,
the
work was done for free. The book is for free in 5 languages. The videos are free. Everything's for free. So I'm not trying to sell anyone anything. This is actually a giant waste of my time from a business point of view.
Well, sometimes we do things for the greater good. And, that's a lot about, what we have in common is this show right now is a lot of, it's also a passion project because I also want to ask questions. And, I want to also, when I went into journalism, it was part of our mantra in our last year was, I still remember it was like out to change the world on deadline. And I actually went in because I was going to go into law at one point and then ended up going into journalism with the belief that I was going to change the world and be like the fifth estate and question authority, question what was happening in the world. So here we are.
Yeah. Unfortunately, those journalists are no longer journalists.
Some of there are some ones like even what I'm doing. I think this is what we're going to see more of is that more people are doing these types of shows and there is more information. And that will be a whole other show I want to talk about is the need to curate, your feed, curate and do some research about where you're getting information from.
Yeah.
And, I also, help those in manufacture as well as others both tell and share their story. But because of my background, I do the research and I want to make sure we talk a lot about authenticity, right? And I know it's an overused word, but I do want to make sure that any clients I work with, that they're telling a story that's based on fact, based on research.
Yeah.
And, maybe not everybody will agree with everybody's opinions on this. But that's where doing your research is so valuable.
Well, I like to say, just go with what's true, as I said earlier, right? Go with something that's actually true, or you'll make bad decisions. And then you have to ask yourself, well, what's true? And the answer to that is, if you look at Carl Sagan, he did a really nice video, The Baloney Detector, how you can tell what's true and what isn't. And one of the most important things is go and look for the evidence. See who has the best evidence. If the World Wildlife Fund says that plastics take 500 years to degrade, and they'll cite some other site, which they'll cite CITE, they will say, here's the proof. But when you go there, they're just pointing to another one and another one and another one. There's not a single scientific article in the history of the world that says plastics take that long to degrade, because it's not true. There's like 10,000 articles saying that they do degrade, and rapidly. It's been measured. So and on my website, whenever I say something, I cite the science. There's loads of links there's a whole page on plastic degradation. You can check everything I say, and it's all true. So unfortunately,
Yes.
people who claim to care about the environment can't find 2 minutes to even glance at the evidence.
Well, and I often say, a key part is follow the money on any topic. It's really important to go do that. And like you said, go explore. And another issue, obviously, is censorship, because a lot of information, not so much necessarily, your information is out there, but I've seen that as a big problem too, is that not all information is available. And even myself, that's, used Google, used Wikipedia, even now Chat GPT, it's showing that there is bias. So, and that's fine. Like, if there is bias, at least we need to be aware of it and know that when you're doing a search, like I've gone to search for some things on Google recently to do some research for this show, and can't find it.
Well, some people are confused also about Google. They'll say, oh, if you're a real scientist, you shouldn't be relying on Google, ha, ha, ha. And I'm like, no. I go to Google, I type in whale mortality study, and that takes me to the peer-reviewed scientific study about whale mortality. I'm not asking Google for the answers. I'm just using it as a search engine, which is what it is, to find the science. And there are other places you look as well where scientific articles are stored. So there's major publishers where you can go and get information.
Well, we have some more questions. I'm definitely going to need you to come back on, Chris, because there's so much more I want to talk about innovation. But let's go through a few questions. And we have Simon said, thank you for that. We have Linda saying, great conversation. Thank you, Linda. We have, okay, so this looks like it's Rod Marshall. Chris, can you suggest the best avenue to hold journalists to a higher standing on what they report? Yes, it's Rod Marshall, seem to be coming up anonymous. Yeah. Okay.
Wow, that's a great question, Rod.
That may be a topic of a future show, actually.
I don't expect all journalists to be professional, because nobody in any profession, all of them are. But it's worrying if you put out a plea for one ethical journalist who will glance at data and you get 9,000 hits and no emails or phone calls. And when you write to them, they don't. So I think basically I should have a license. I'm a chartered chemist. I'm applying to be a chartered environmentalist. I'm a fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry and so forth. There are, certifications you need to be a doctor or a dentist or something. And I think that journalists should have that too. And if they don't uphold the code of ethics and they're doing things just for the money and with disregard for the truth, then I think they should be fined and eventually fired if they violate that trust. They're in a position of trust. They're the filter of all the information that we get. Just look at my own work. How am I supposed to reach anybody with this work? It is having an impact. It is reaching some people, but I can never hope to win, because I'm up against huge organizations with hundreds of millions of dollars and professional marketing teams. And the media's got to give us, the media used to be the people who would expose the truth and help the small guy, but not anymore.
Yeah, and I have many thoughts on that as well, but that will be, so stay tuned, Rod. I'll come back to future shows, because we will be talking about that. And I think now media, things have, changed so much from the days when I was working in print, even to now. Like, now there's so many different avenues for information. So I will say that is a really complex topic about what we're going to do with journalism going forward and media. So Rod, thank you for that question. It's going to be on my list for future show to discuss. How do you explain that the so-called environmental movement was able to claim the high moral ground and literally hijack the debate around the environment when there's so much data to debunk their claims? We sort of touched upon that, but I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
Yeah, well, they started off with good intentions, right? And then they morphed into something else, which is exactly why a lot of these environmentalists are leaving and writing books exposing their former places, because the genuine ones, leave and become disgust and expose their practices. So I think it was a slow process, and one day Patrick Moore woke up and realized that these business people had taken over, and they were just all about ripping people off for money and didn't care about the environment anymore. So I think that's how they did it. They started off with the moral high ground and then lost it, and nobody really questioned it.
Okay, that's good. We'll just go through here. So there was an Arturas, welcome. There was an interview with plastics free influencer in Business Magazine Lithuania last week. That guy told that human is eating one plastic credit card per month. I asked him about his weight. Silence.
That's the other thing. People always say they're against plastics, and you can tell they're not genuine, right? Imagine somebody said, I'm against plastics. I say, great, hand me your laptop, hand me your cell phone, and I'm going to turn off the electricity to your house because every wire is insulated with plastic. And right? So take their laptop, take their cell phone, turn off their electricity, and then count the seconds until they decide that they don't hate plastics as much. I'm not one for touting the advantages of plastic. I purposely avoid doing that because I think it's cheap and sleazy and not the right argument. The argument is that it's the greenest solution in most cases. But I would like to call some of these people on their pretend virtue, where they're going around with their cotton bags and pretending to care, because they clearly don't. They're typing on a plastic keyboard to tell me that I'm that I'm not genuine or whatever. You're like, well, hang on a minute, who's really genuine here? Who's spent thousands of their hours unpaid checking the facts, and who's just making criticisms based on something that doesn't hold up?
Yeah, there is, and I always say follow the money and follow the data. Those are two things that are so important on any topic you look at. And I often go like, of course you should, like, if you, same with polls, I look at polls and I go, you have to go look at what was the question, who did the poll, was it
right,
who does that polling company support in elections? I mean, everything is, and that's what I said, objectivity in media is, and I said this even when I was working in the media, and is that, it's not really realistic to think that we're ever going to have a completely objective journalism perspective. But that's why you need to have a variety of views and information, and not go down that like one narrative.
Right. Well, that's where we are now.
Yeah. We have Nick Gardner thinking this is excellent. Thank you both. Thank you for tuning in, Nick. Nick. Yeah. Great. I love seeing we have some new people to my show. So thank you for stopping by. Different perspectives seems logical. And politicians, well, yes, follow the politicians. Yes. And here we have
they end up reversing these bans, because in some places it's illegal to enact policy which harms the environment, to increases harm. So they do a ban without even checking Google for 2 seconds to find the science, and then they end up reversing it and looking like idiots. So if you're a politician and you don't want to look like an idiot, then check the facts before you act.
That's the thing. And I want to we have one more image I want to show, because this was, when we hear a lot about let's pull this up here, and wait a minute. There we go. Okay. We think this is plastic production requires less total oil than other materials.
Right.
Oh, this wasn't the ocean one. I was going to show something else. But okay, why don't we talk about this, though, because it does show about how much fossil fuel is used for energy. So can you explain this?
Yeah, this one went viral, and I found this in a book as well. So people always think because fossil fuels go into plastics, they must be bad for fossil fuel. They must be consuming a lot of fossil fuel, because the fossil fuel ends up as a raw material to make the plastic. But when you look at the total amount of fossil fuel used to make all these different materials, the size of the overall bar is the amount of fossil fuel. You can see tons is used to make magnesium and aluminium and zinc, and glass is not on here. It wasn't in the chart, but it's also huge for glass and steel. And plastic is less than all of them. So although a little bit of oil goes into the plastic as a raw material, the rest of it is burned as energy to make the material, right? So 650 kilojoules of energy is burned to make the magnesium. That's a lot of oil being burned to heat up the magnesium. And it's intuitively obvious, right? If you look at steel production or glass production, it's glowing red hot. That's how much fossil fuel you have to burn to heat that stuff up, to melt it, to process it. Plastic is processed at much, much lower temperatures, a couple hundred degrees. And that's why it's overall less energy, although plastic it contains some fossil fuel. It massively reduces the amount of fossil fuel we use on a net basis, but compared to other materials as well. And this went viral. It got 200,000 views. It was, I've been saying it, but there's nothing, apparently the graphic was very powerful.
Wow. Okay. Now I'm going there was one other, let me see if I have that on, I thought there was one I had on, oh, maybe this was it. No, that's chart, summary, diagram. Okay. I thought I had one showing but you've talked about it, what plastic was in the ocean. So let's go over. I want something that Amir said, because I think we want to be clear on this. He said single-use plastic bags do have environmental impacts.
Yeah, everything has an impact.
Yeah. And I don't think anyone is disagreeing that straws, plastic bags, but it's all, we have to look at relativity as well, right? And I think that's where I came in, because I thought, because all this energy and time is banning, and the time and the money spent on talking about this, but we're not really talking about, disposal, and recycling. That's a whole other topic. Yeah. I put my recycling bins out, but I'm I put them properly. I rinse out things, I do, but I see pizza boxes and everything in plastic bin in the recycling boxes. Which
America's anomalously low on plastic recycling rate. It's lower than other countries, so it is too low right now. But if you look at the life cycle analysis, even with the current recycling rate, which is too low, plastic is still greener. So this idea that we go to metal or glass because it's recycled more is wrong. It's scientifically wrong. It's way more energy. It's way more waste. It's way more CO2. It's way more toxins. It's just a terrible idea. It's equivalent to saying go and buy a Ferrari because it'll have a higher trade-in value at the end of life, right? That's what we're basically saying. Let's go and use materials which have got tons of energy in them and are horrendous to make and terrible for the environment because they'll be worth more at the end of life and because they'll be recycled more. And that's not the answer. Nobody buys a Ferrari because it has a higher trade-in value than a Fiat.
Whoa, Chris, this is, I have to say, you are, from a curiosity perspective, this show is probably, I think now for a lot of people, this will be very informative for the people that will be listening. Sadly, a lot of people probably here today are, sometimes what happens, we're preaching to the choir, but I'm hoping that some people that will tune in may at least see things in a different perspective. I know I do work in manufacturing, so that's full disclosure. I've worked but I don't own a mold making shop or a molding shop. I actually just help them tell their stories. And part of that is I do research. And, and when I heard about banning plastics, I thought, better go check into this.
I don't make, sell, or market plastics either. So I'm out of that side. This is a ring. It's made of gold and platinum, right? That's my wedding ring. And the three worst materials in the world for the environment are gold, palladium, and platinum. They're horrendous in terms of pollution, in terms of CO2, water use, waste, everything. They're just terrible. And what else do we know about them? We also know that they're the three most expensive materials we can think of, right? For the exact same reasons that they're bad for the environment, because they use so much waste and so much pollution and so much water and so much energy and so forth. So things that are expensive tend to be terrible for the environment, and things that are cheap tend to be good for the environment. And that's relevant for a couple of reasons. One is it's part of the reasons why polyethylene is not recycled more than it is, right? If you look at platinum and palladium and gold, nobody's throwing them away. They always keep them and they always recycle them because they're horrendous for the environment and they've got so much cost and energy in them. Whereas if you look at something like polyethylene, it's so cheap at the end of life that it's barely worth recycling, right? From an economic point of view. And that's one of the reasons why the recycling rate is lower for things that are green. And there's another reason why this fundamental relationship between what's green and what's cheap is important. And that is that we've got a recession coming here and people are asking themselves, can I afford to be green? Will I still be able to afford to buy this stuff which is green? And the answer is yes, because usually if you're in the supermarket, you want to know what's the greenest solution. Usually it's the cheapest one. or the lightest one. So those are the two easy ways. If you're in a supermarket, you don't know which is the greenest solution. Look at a paper straw and a plastic straw. Paper straw is twice as much material. It's 2 grams. The plastic is less than a gram. And the plastic one is greener, and it's cheaper as well. And it applies to, and if you look at the bag, right, the paper bag from Kroger is 60 grams, and the plastic one is less than 6. So that's more than 10 times more waste, and it's less green and more cost. So this is an easy way for regular people to know, who don't want to do all the research and have to make a spot decision. The cheapest solution is usually the greenest one, because it's using less resources to make.
Perspective. Sometimes I said my brain actually aches because I have to go check out things, and because it's easy just to follow along, right? I mean, I've always said sometimes it's easier to be a follower than a leader, and yet I had to go check out this. And when you're talking about straws, because I remember when companies used to give out the old metal straws.
The kids got metal straws at school
with a plastic tip at the end.
Yeah. A woman died from one of those. There was a story about that.
Oh, geez. Okay, so we'll start to wrap up, because Chris, we could go on. There's so much here, and I just want to thank you. I know for spending your time. And now, I have a question. What do you do to feed your family? Because I think I know them, but I know you're a scientist. But
yeah, I would say I'm a plastic material formulator. So let's say you had plastic, and you maybe you have a plastic pipe, right? And you want to put it in the ground. You want to be sure it doesn't degrade for 50 years. It wants to degrade. It's fundamentally unstable, just like anything organic, like an apple or us. Everything degrades. It's organic. But let's say you want to make sure it lasts for 50 years. Then you would put in appropriate stabilizers. And I would be the guy who could tell you how to do that. And the same with putting plastic in the body. Or let's say I made a plastic that changes transparency. When you heat it up and cool it down, it goes from clear to opaque and back again. I'm the only one who's ever made that. I patented that. Another thing is, there's a company who wanted to make injection moldable PET. You mentioned you're into plastic molding. Mm-hmm. It's been impossible to injection mold PET because it doesn't flow well enough. It's one of the greenest plastics, right? So we want to be able to injection mold it and make parts out of it, but it doesn't flow well enough, and it takes too long to solidify. So I was able to patent a way of injection molding PET cutlery and all kinds of thin parts to make thin, recyclable, green plastic parts. So that's the kind of thing I do. I do science around plastic materials, solving problems. I sold a technology to Procter & Gamble not that long ago. So companies come to me when they're stuck with a difficult problem. That's what pays the bills.
Wow. And I want to say for everybody listening, not once have you said, oh, here, I want to promote myself. That's what I really have valued about you, is that I really I've been watching you. I've been stalking you for a while on social, and that you've never really self-promoted. You really have talked about plastics, and it gives for someone like me, that was a lot of credibility, because I was watching and listening, and that I, even this far into the interview, had to say, oh, by the way,
yeah.
How do you pay the bills?
I'm like, I don't even sell a service. They come to me and say, can you do a life cycle analysis? Can you do whatever? I'm like, no, this is it. I'm just trying to inform people so they can make smarter choices.
That is, and we have, I want to start with, I know Catherine has said, fascinating. The choir needs to sing so much louder. Well, I think there's the choir singing loud. You're right. More people than Chris have to do this. And that's why this show, why I've done it, and I'm very specific about the guests I want to have on, are people that have a story to tell, and they don't really have, an agenda necessarily, or if they do have an agenda, that we address that directly. And
I have an agenda. It's let's make choices based on things that are actually true. That's my agenda.
Which is,
and let me tell you, this is not a lot of fun, because people don't want to hear this. I'm not doing this to be popular. If I wanted to be popular, I'd be prancing around with my cotton bag looking like a saint, right? This is not an enjoyable process. But I think the truth is worth it.
I can tell you from some work I've done, especially lately, it's even the previous show that I had, it's not, a lot of people don't like to hear that there are other views, right? Because, and like I said, that'll be a story for another day, because people do get in their tunnel vision and only can see one view. And I will say this, I have Ted Lasso picture up on my wall, and that's my inspiration, because I love that show. And there's a great scene in there. This is the dart scene where he says, the mantra from that is be curious, not judgmental.
Right.
And that's what I really believe in, is that guests that I've on, I don't want to necessarily look at judging. I want to say, okay, let's hear where they're from and hear your stories. So
The other thing is the strength of your conviction shouldn't be based on your emotions. It should be based on how strong your evidence is, right? I mean, if you're absolutely passionate about something, wouldn't you spend a few minutes to make sure you're right? I mean, because passion is the thing that should come after you know you're on the right side. At the moment, everyone's passionate and they're increasing harm because they forgot to check, even spend 30 seconds to check that they're right. So that's an issue, right? You've got the most passionate people causing the most harm because apparently they didn't make sure they were on the side of justice.
well, as I mentioned, this show is a bit of a passion project, but only because I waited to launch it until I had done research and made sure, like I had to, as Dave Chrysler says, I did a lot of process around, what the goal was. And really the goal is exactly like you. It's like, let's just ask more questions and not try to just assume things, or that everything we see on social media, mainstream media, or even alternative media, like not all of that should be taken at face value. And that's where data comes in, right? Go back to data.
Yeah, it's all there. It's all public. People think that plastics are scary and unknown, but there's thousands and thousands. I found out. I got reading glasses now. I didn't have these when I started this adventure. So the data's all there, and we know exactly what there is, where it is, and what the effects are. There's nothing to be scared of.
Catherine has a great question, but I'm going to bring that up in a minute, Catherine, but I want to go just look a few more comments. We have blaming is easier than changing things in a better way. Yeah, that's like most things. It's much easier to blame. I love this. Lance is saying he's going to try to go to his grocery store and reverse their ban on plastic bags using the great data that Chris says. Okay, way to go, Lance. Sometimes you got to start, maybe try with your local news organization. See if you
They
can
ask me at Kroger, paper or plastic, and I say plastic, please. It's better for the environment. My wife hates it when I do that, but I say it every time. One thing we haven't covered is litter, because people blame plastic.
Yes. Okay,
That's really stupid, right? Because I mean, even kids know if you drop a candy wrapper on the floor and then blame the wrapper, you're out of your mind. I mean, no kid or adult's going to fall for that rubbish. But these NGOs are telling us all the time we should blame the wrapper. We should blame. They say Coca-Cola is one of the biggest polluters in the world. It's complete nonsense. Their customers are some of the biggest polluters in the world when they drop their stuff where it shouldn't be. But blaming the companies or blaming the material is wrong, and it's scientifically wrong. They've done studies on littering. They've looked at beaches and found out where the litter comes from. It comes from the people on the beaches. Right? That's scientifically proven. It's proven that more than 80% of litter, they literally did studies measuring hundreds of thousands of littering events and watched people just drop this litter intentionally over 80% of the time. And even when they put trash cans 8 steps apart, people were still littering. They littered less. But they're still littering with a trash can every 8 steps. And so once you understand, as I said, I'm a problem solver, right? So once you understand that the problem is human behavior, you realize that the proven solution is education, putting deposits on things so that it's too expensive to drop it, and that works, and fines. There we go. There's a solution. Blaming plastics or putting bans and taxes on things, that's just a money grab. It doesn't make any sense, and it's counterproductive.
Litter is, you're right. Thank you for touching upon that, because that's also so crucial. And we have more questions. I don't know if we're going to get to all of them, but there's some great questions here. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to this show, and for Chris giving us time, taking away from his other work to do this. But I know for myself, this has been even a greater education for me. And we have,
These are all questions written. If you keep a log of the questions, I'll answer them, and we'll do it with a follow-up if you don't get time to go.
Okay, perfect. Because there's some and I'm sure afterwards, I know you are on LinkedIn as well. And also you have a YouTube channel. I did a post and tagged your channel on my channel. So we have Amir says, what's your take on biodegradable plastics? So that's another good question that I was wondering about is, what's the story on biodegradable plastics?
Yeah, to me, they don't make sense. So if you look at a life cycle analysis, for example, bags, biodegradable plastics are worse than polyethylene. And so they're more expensive. They got worse mechanical properties. They're less green. And when you think about it, what does degradation mean, right? This is the Harry Potter solution. You're basically taking a bag and trying to make it litter friendly, right? I can be a slob and drop it on the floor, and hey presto, I'm going to wave my wand. It's going to disappear and degrade. But what happens when these things degrade? They give off carbon dioxide, which is the exact thing we're trying to avoid. So now you're spending more money for something that's less green, gives off carbon dioxide, and it's a worse product. It's the thicker bag, and the whole thing is just nonsense. There's a lot of marketing around it, but so far I've yet to see a convincing life cycle analysis that shows any of these biodegradable plastics as being greener. And as we just found out, there's 3 peer-reviewed studies showing that if you take a polyethylene bag and leave it outdoors, it will fall to pieces in less than a year. It takes about 9 months. So the regular bags we have here are the greenest, and they do degrade anyway.
Okay, well, thank you. We are gonna, I know, wrap up because we've gone over the hour, but this show, there was so much information. I will probably be pulling out some pieces of it, and you're welcome to as well, Chris, to share anything, because there was a lot here. And maybe just to wrap up, to say, you had said something earlier I want to go back to. I think it was an economist said that, because let's look at what can we do next? So we've heard what to do next. And maybe you can touch upon this. We'll go back because this was something Catherine said. How can we make truth more sexy?
That's the problem. Fiction is a lot more exciting because with fiction, the gloves are off, right? You can make up anything when it comes to fiction. And somebody there's a thing called Brandolini's law. It's an Italian computer programmer, and he says it takes 10 or 100 times more energy to disprove the nonsense than it did to make it up in the first place. And I found that out to my detriment, because if you want to prove something's true, you have to go and read 100 articles and find the facts. Whereas the person who makes stuff up, it's no effort. They just pluck it out of thin air, like Martha Gorman did in her book.
Yeah, that is, Catherine, that's a really good question, because sometimes it is easier to go with the bag around the turtle's neck. It's easier to go with the straw in the nose, like things that, because that touches emotion. And I have done fundraising. I'm actually doing work right now in the area of mental health, especially youth mental health. And that's not a very, at times, sexy topic, because it's there's a lot of things around stigma related to it, and it's a much more complex issue than fundraising for some other more, for lack of a better term, sometimes emotional topics. So it is difficult, and it's sometimes, even though the stats are showing what's happening with youth, and anyways, that's a whole other topic. I'll be talking about that on another show. We don't want to go, speaking of going down rabbit holes.
I did mention the turtle again. I would like to say that I posted up and I called the BBC on their fake picture, and they changed it. So if you go to that story now, it says, "Oh, we had a misleading picture and it's been updated."
Wow.
And they updated their statistics. They said there was 100 million tons of plastic going into the ocean every day, and then the actual number is 6,000 every year. So they updated the number somewhat, but they didn't correct it to the actual latest figures.
Okay.
So I'll give them some respect for that.
We are, and I will post this up just because we were talking about litter, because approximately 80% of ocean plastics are fishing and waste. Could they mandate stainless steel tagging and register these nets by the manufacturers and have the commercial fisheries register them? Okay, that's
correct. Yeah, there should be $100 billion fine for anyone who comes back without their net. I agree with you. About 85% of it, up to 85% of what we find is fishing gear. And that does harm things, but it's not the plastic's fault. It doesn't matter what the net's made of, right? They used to be made of rope, hemp, or whatever it was, and that was causing the same issue. So the fishing industry is to blame. And here's another example. If you place the blame correctly, you can find the solution easily.
But isn't it easier, I guess, to blame me with my plastic straw, my plastic bag, right? It's like, because it makes us feel like, okay, something's being done.
We're changing the world one straw at a
Changing
time.
the world. Chris, thank you. I know there was a few other questions. I apologize if we didn't get to your question today, but I will say it was a very lively discussion. And stay tuned. Please follow Chris on. I'm going to see if I can put this up here while we're talking. Hold on just a minute. I want to so it's phantomplastics.com, right? This ad banner.
One closing thought from me. I like to say you can be for the environment or against plastics, but not both. Because if you're replacing plastics, you're increasing harm. So make up your mind. Are you having more fun demonizing plastic, or do you actually want to be a virtuous person and do something that's beneficial? Okay. Chris, thank you for that. Thank you for your time. I'm just going to have you go in the green room, and I'll be there just shortly. I'm just going to do a wrap up. And I had many more questions, but I'd rather bring you back for a part 2, I think. And maybe we'll... one last, has anyone ever agreed to do like a debate or anything on this? Have you ever? No, there's a journalist with Packaging News, and he spent 3 months trying to find a single NGO who would debate me, and none of them would. because they don't have any evidence. They're just making stuff up. I would kill them.
That is interesting. Well, you're joining a crowd of
Whoppers for Congress 3 weeks ago, and I debunked it the same day and said, no, not true, not true, not true. Here's the science. And they had no qualifications. They weren't a scientist, but they were able to get up in front of Congress and just say a bunch of stuff which was, didn't stand up to scrutiny.
I often look at that, and whenever I'm looking at someone that's being often vilified, I want to see, okay, is there a debate? And there is some people right now I know in the news, and people will not debate them. And I always ask, okay, why?
Yeah.
Why? So, yeah, because I would have loved to, and I know that's probably not possible. I was like, okay, and I don't always like debates where people are just yelling. Like I come and have a reasonable discussion with facts and say, like, if you could say this is your fact, and someone said, okay, I've done these studies and can show, and then you have a reasonable discussion. But
yeah.
I know I had trouble finding anything around the ocean like once I went and looked into some of your information. So if anyone is watching this later or seeing this and wants to send me something that debunks something, please send it to me. I'd be very interested, and I'm sure Chris would too if there's someone that can present something different.
Yeah. Terrific.
Okay, I will see you in the green room shortly.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Chris. Well, thanks everyone who is still here watching this live show today. I have to say, as a former journalist, and I'm now Chief Curiosity Officer with Gale Now. And my business, like Chris, is I help a lot with public relations. And I guess ironically, I also do things related to marketing and helping people tell and share their story. But my work is also around my 3-step process, which is sign up, suit up, and show up. Sign up is all about mindset. Suit up is doing your research and then showing up. And I have to say, Chris is someone who does all 3 of those things. And so go check out my channel. I have some previous shows on where I interviewed people talking about manufacturing and marketing. And my new show is Curious Minds. So I'm talking about everything related to, I had someone on talking about the convoy in Ottawa, talking about mandates, talking about, we'll be having future shows talking about Web3 and the metaverse and lots of other interesting topics that really require a bit of a more critical eye and looking at data and looking at what's happening out there in our world, our wild, wonderful world. Thanks, everyone. You can follow me on YouTube. Please go to my channel. If you put in Gale Now and Curious Minds, please go subscribe to my channel. Likely a lot of people here today, you seem to have some curious minds. You will want to see some of my upcoming shows. And I look forward to seeing you in future Curious Mind shows. Okay, thanks everybody. Have a great day, night.